will shine a glaring spotlight on the history and tactics of modern psychological warfare on Americans with Dr. Robert Malone on this episode of United Patriots Uprising with Gary Binford. I'm your host, Gary Binford. Thanks for joining us. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. The video version you can find at YouTube, Rumble, the God Family and Country Television Network, the Rose Unplugged Media Network, VAChristian.org, Conservative Television of America, and the America First Warehouse.com. Wherever you go to get the broadcast, please subscribe, leave us a rating and a review, and be sure to tell your friends about the show. Now, there's an archive version. The first 3 years, the show was audio only. If you go to radioinfluence.com and look for the archive of this show, you'll find guests like Morgan Brittany, Ben Carson, Judge Janine Pirro, Kevin Sorbo, Carol Swain, Alex Newman, Monica Crowley, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, Brigitte Gabriel, Pastor Jack Hibbs, Diamond and Silk, Tom Holman, Kerry Lake, Mike Lindell, and Peter Navarro, just some of the 180 or 90 high-profile guests who have been on the show. And the beautiful thing about it, what they said then is just as valid today. So please check that out. You know, I don't know much at all about psychological warfare. I understand spiritual warfare, but I don't know much about psychological warfare, so I am very interested in what today's guest has to say. But I will tell you this, the two, psychological warfare and spiritual warfare, are very, very connected because they both involve the reprogramming of our minds. So I want to find out what this is all about. Are you ready? Well, let's get into it. My guest has medical and Masters of Science degrees. Listing just a few of his accolades, he's an internationally recognized virologist and immunologist. I hope I said that right. Clinical research and regulatory affairs expert and the co-founder of the Malone Institute, which aims to bring back integrity to government, the biological sciences, and medicine. He's here to unpack his latest book, co-authored with his wife, Dr. Jill Malone, entitled PsyWar, Enforcing the New World Order. All right, welcome to the show, Dr. Robert Malone. Dr. Malone, how are you?
I'm good. The truth is I've got a little bit of a broken foot from a colt that got aggressive, but other than that, I'm hunky-dory.
You know what I was getting ready to say? I was getting ready to say you probably kicked a liberal in the ass, but actually maybe you did. Oh, boy. I hope you're all right. Your previous book was entitled Lies My Government Told Me. Don't get me started on that topic. PsyWar exposed the hiry and tactics.
That book isn't long enough.
I was going to say it should be like a Encyclopedia Britannica with volumes and volumes and volumes, and the volumes would continue. Okay, right.
That's right.
Right, there you go. But PsyWar exposes the history and tactics of modern psychological warfare on the American people, and it offers a way forward for citizens to resist totalitarian control. As a medical doctor, how and why did you venture into this area?
Well, because I was subjected to this technology because I spoke out concerning the ethics and the practice, the details and the toxicity of the mRNA-based products and any of the genetic vaccines for COVID that involved expression of spike protein. And of course, that wasn't to be tolerated, had to be shut down by really government coordinating with a variety of actors to suppress that information that myself and many other physicians were trying to share with the public under the idea that any information, whether true or false, that would cause somebody to become, quote, vaccine hesitant, needed to be shut down and suppressed because of the logic that this virus, SARS-CoV-2, was incredibly lethal and incredibly infectious. It turns out it was incredibly infectious. It turns out it wasn't incredibly lethal. That was all overstated. And just to put a point on that, the first person that I'm aware of that clearly documented that the SARS-CoV-2 virus had a case fatality rate, that's the number of people that would die out of how many people are infected, that is pretty much aligned with a severe influenza outbreak, as opposed to the 3.2 to 3.4% case fatality rate that was estimated based on modeling that all the world governments accepted that came out of Imperial College in London.
You know, I don't understand why America allowed itself to react to this when the swine flu and what Obama did or didn't do. The country wasn't shut down. We weren't forced to take a stab and a jab. I mean, and before we get into your book, since this is the way you framed this, were you shocked when you got canceled over your positions on the China COVID virus and the vaccine? Were you surprised by that?
Yeah, so that was really what triggered the build out of this book through Substack. We kind of serialized it on Substack chapter by chapter and then pulled it together. Is trying to make sense out of what I was experiencing. I've been at the tip of the spear in multiple outbreaks before, I think 5 or 6, going back to HIV in the early days. And my wife and I had put out another book that no one hardly knows about in February of 2020 called How to Prepare and Protect Yourself from the Novel Coronavirus. It didn't even have a name back then. And that got, I'd say, well, canceled. It got canceled by Amazon. And they wouldn't give us an answer as to why it got taken down until finally they said we had violated community standards, but they couldn't tell us what community standards we'd violated. We didn't cuss, we didn't swear, there wasn't any porn. I mean, it was hard to figure what it was. And now we know that it was about the coordination to suppress any voices that were different from the official narrative coming out of the government. Turns out that deplatforming happened just a couple of weeks after Amazon sat in the White House with a number of others, including the World Health Organization, and had discussions in the White House about the need to control information about this particular virus and this outbreak. I mean, we've been subjected to amazing levels of coordinated propaganda, censorship, and, there's no other way to say it, psychological warfare that basically caused your comment about why did America go along with this? Well, they were subjected to military grade psychological warfare technology in order to control what they were thinking and feeling and doing. And that is the topic of the book.
Right. And before I have you break that down and explain to people how they use the psychological warfare, and as you say, psychological warfare and propaganda, they go together in marketing, like you talk about. I heard you in another interview talking about the use of sex to sell cars and food. The one thing that stunned me when America shut down was the response of the college kids. Because the college kids have always been against the man, always against the man, that you could always count on the college kids to rebel against authority, to rebel. And when the college kids put those masks on and said, I'm not going to go see my girlfriend, I'm not going to go to the clubs, I'm not going to go to the beach, I'm not going to go to class, I'm not going to party, I'm just going to comply, and started yelling and screaming at us walking around without masks, I couldn't believe it. How did they psychologically get in their heads?
So that's a good question. And I think that the generation that you're talking about, I was just listening to Crosby, Stills, and Nash as I was driving home today and remembering that history of protest songs in the 60s. Mm-hmm. And remember that when I went on Joe Rogan and did my infamous broadcast where I kind of dropped truth bomb after truth bomb, The person that made the most public fuss was Neil Young. And he
Oh,
publicly said that he was going to take his songbook off of Spotify, which was Joe Rogan's home base. What wasn't told was that in parallel, Coca-Cola had acted through the GARM agreement to put pressure on Spotify to either deplatform Rogan or do something about that particular broadcast,
hmm,
uh, because they felt that it was spreading disinformation or misinformation. So it was actually Coca-Cola. But my point with Neil Young is that even those that had been involved in the
right.
protest movements against the war in the 60s had all been basically co-opted by the time we came around to this. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why I grabbed onto and lit up and really lit up the world about Matthias Desmet's theory of mass formation, which is really just a 21st century update of the work of Hannah Arendt, going back all the way to Sigmund Freud, about the madness of crowds, about how in Matthias in particular emphasized that when people become socially isolated, they become very susceptible to manipulations by an authority figure. And in this case, we had authority figures coming on in every possible channel, uh, pumping information about the fear. I call this psychological bioterrorism, the fear of death,
Right.
that you are at risk for dying. One of the most powerful fears we have, one of the most powerful motivators. They used the fear of death in order to manipulate people to accept these various measures. And furthermore, they did so after they had done literally randomized clinical trials testing different fear messaging to figure out which were the ones that were going to be most potent in getting people to do whatever it is that the government wanted them to do. The history here, when you dive into it, is really shocking, unless you have been following closely the disclosures about USAID. That's why I'm really
Hmm,
grateful to Doge and Elon Musk,
right.
because the things that we talk about in the book, a lot of people think that's kind of tinfoil hat crazy talk. Uh, we knew it wasn't. It's all well documented. The book is highly referenced, but it's still, if you haven't been in the barrel of experiencing this or following it closely, it's hard to believe that our government would do this to us. But then you look at what USAID has been doing domestically and internationally, and largely in partnership with George Soros in many
Yeah.
cases. Then it all kind of comes into focus, and you realize that this coordinated propaganda that was deployed globally, particularly in the West, is part of a broader propaganda censorship. Basically, if you're familiar with Operation Mockingbird, the CIA program that manipulated the media through the 60s in particular, uh, that has now kind of been scaled up and gone international, in particular with the USAID, but also with the CIA and with our military in the context of conflicts against the Taliban, Al Qaeda, and many others. As you dig into this and follow things like Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi and the Twitter files, et cetera, you
Hmm.
come to realize that our government has been using these kinds of mental manipulation, psychological manipulation techniques on us for decades. And in the book, we kind of start because you got to start the timeline somewhere. You can't. We could go. I suppose we could have gotten all the way back to Sun Tzu and the Art of War,
Yeah.
uh, but we kind of pinned it at the government's management, let's say, of information concerning the assassination of the president, John F. Kennedy, and kind of moved it forward from there and talked about Edward Bernays and the history of propaganda, but in particular, the history of what our government has done since that point in time.
Yeah. Now, delving into this, some of your chapters are propaganda, some of the topics are propaganda and behavioral control, psychological bioterrorism, which you kind of mentioned here, the deep state censorship. We saw that happen to you. I got caught a little tail end of it. Surveillance capitalism, administrative state objectives, fifth generation warfare, PsyWar tactics, techno totalitarianism and the new world order and global control. I don't, obviously you're not going to give away all your book. You want people to buy it and read it, which I tell everybody, go get this book. It's a great book. Give them a little overview of one or two of these topics that they would what they would learn.
So there's a couple that are really pivotal here. That just as an introduction, I mentioned the kind of the history of psychological warfare in the United States and the U.S. government. But it's important to understand this topic of psychological bioterrorism, or it's otherwise known as information bioterrorism. And this chapter is based on an interview with a former KGB agent that had retired basically and moved to New Zealand. And he gave an interview to a New Zealand academic journal in 2017 in which he described this process of information or psychological bioterrorism as basic fundamental spycraft that is well known to the various intelligence agencies throughout the world, including the former Soviet Union. And what he laid down, he was talking specifically about bird flu. In 2017, remember, so this is before the COVID crisis. This is before Event 201 and all of that stuff. So in 2017, he was talking about what was then the recently concluded bird flu pandemic that was used to scare all of us. And he laid out a series of steps that are well known in spycraft that include first injecting a fear narrative into general circulation through lower level academic journals or lower level press outlets that are less credible, let's say, and then gradually building it by bringing in academics that will concur with it. And, often they have a conflict of interest, particularly when it relates to infectious disease, gradually snowballing the fear. And then what happens is akin to the Nancy Pelosi strategy of the wrap-up smear. So then as you kind of elevate this fear, escalate it, build it step by step through injecting it into the national dialogue, then you get the big boys like Washington Post, New York Times, etc., Atlantic Monthly, notoriously. Atlantic Monthly is kind of like on the threshold of credible these days, but they're glad to take these narratives that are promoted by the government, and then they wrap up all of the information that's been intentionally injected at this lower level, and they'll do a piece that'll say, well, this academic said that, and that academic said that, and this low level, Breitbart News, whatever, said this, that, and the other thing, and then they'll write their article around that. And then you get the higher ones coming in saying, oh, we have all this going on about bird flu. It's so scary. Look, it's been cited in the Atlantic Monthly, and the government is alarmed about it, and et cetera, et cetera. And then so there's a standard process this is used again and again. And then what it's doing is it's training the population like Pavlov training his dogs to respond to a bell, to salivate, thinking they're going to get dinner. Okay, so the population is trained using this injected narrative and information to build a fear around this object that they're focused on. And we can see this playing out with bird flu now. It played out with monkeypox, and notoriously it played out with SARS-CoV-2. And this fear of death is incredibly powerful. And then once the objectives have been achieved, social disruption, upward transfer of wealth, whatever the objectives were associated with this, population control, et cetera. Remember, he's writing this in 2017. He says, once the objectives have been achieved, And by the way, the economic disruption with psychological warfare, psychological bioterrorism, is much greater than the economic damage associated with actual bioterrorism events that have been cataloged, like the anthrax spore events. So once the objectives have been achieved, then the intelligence agency or whomever is propagating this narrative, this fear narrative, then will deploy some magical solution that will relieve everybody's anxiety. Typically, this will come from an authority figure. In our case, of course, we had a number of those, and Anthony Fauci was kind of the poster child for the authority figure. But he emphasizes that now that you've trained the population to this fear signal, you want to keep it alive, which is quite prophetic when you look back at 2017. He's talking about bird flu, and now we have bird flu fear being reintroduced and escalated. So that's the short version of psychological bioterrorism. When I read his interview as somebody who had been in the gears, the details of what was going on with COVID, it blew my mind because it was book, chapter, and verse, step by step by step, exactly what we had seen deployed. Then, and I'd already suspected that because of the global coordination of messaging and information and strategies like buying up influencers, that there was a CIA or CIA-like entity behind what we were seeing deployed during COVID. There's no other agency that I knew of that had the global reach and power to do this. And now we know that, as Mike Benz puts it, if it's too dirty for the CIA, they get the USAID to do it. So it probably had a lot to do with USAID. We know for sure because of some European nations have reported that officially that a lot of this was propagated internationally by NATO. So the point is, once it's matured, you have released this fear because you've achieved your objective. You introduce some magical thing that will cause everybody's anxiety levels to go down. You still want to keep it alive because it's so easy to reuse it now that you've trained everybody. And of course, the bird flu narrative fits that perfectly. So that's psychological bioterrorism. Another chapter that's really useful, I think, to think about is this one that has to do with modern information in Silicon Valley. And that's this chapter that talks about surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism, a bona fide term. None of these terms I invented, by the way. So surveillance capitalism is the process. We're all aware of it. You start talking about something with your wife, or you Google something, and then suddenly you find when you look on Amazon, they're trying to sell it to you. Or you understand what I'm saying? Or it's even worse. Have Alexa or one of these things that listen in on you. But what most people aren't aware is that, for example, with X, the X platform or Twitter, there's a checkbox, and the same is true with Google. It's right down at the bottom of the selections, the options that you have with your Google browser. But there's a checkbox that comes native checked on that Google or X, in the case of X, it authorizes X to look at not only whatever you do when you have your tab open for X on X, but it also authorizes X to look at everything that's going on in any of the other tabs that are open on your browser. In the case of Google, if you don't check the box off, Google is authorized. You implicitly authorize Google to listen in on any of your conversations. So this is the business model that has made social media and much of Silicon Valley profitable, which is that they're constantly basically stealing every bit of information they can about you and then aggregating it and building essentially an avatar, a digital model of who you are. And then they sell that to whomever wants to buy it, and can meet their price. as behavioral futures. So predictions of what you will buy, what you're thinking, what your motives are, where you are in politically, where you are at a life stage, all of this is super valuable information for a wide range of parties that might wish to influence your behavior to purchase or to vote or whatever. It's been shown that Google does actively influence voting, particularly for non-aligned or uncommitted voters, by up to 15 percentage points, just through the push media because they give you customized AI-driven pushed nudges. So I argue that this business model of surveillance capitalism, which, by the way, has a socket with transhumanism, has to do with building the avatar, but that fundamentally what they're doing is they are stealing part of your soul. You're not authorizing this. You're not aware that they're doing it. They're stealing part of your soul and then selling it. Christianity and the Bible have some things to say about this. This is fundamentally evil. But that is the business model, and no one questions it. And they get away with it because they have these little surreptitious fine print things that nobody ever reads, and they don't realize that down as they scroll down, there's a checkbox that says this, etc. The Attorney General of the state of Texas right now has a lawsuit, I think it's still active, against General Motors because of GM's selling cars that spy on you all the time and report what you're doing. And the buyer doesn't know that they're buying a car that's going to spy on them, right? And this is another example of this. So that's surveillance capitalism. There's a whole bunch of these kinds of little tools and tricks. Another one is nudge technology that was largely piloted in the UK. And nudge is a real slippery slope. And we have, under Obama, they created nudge units here in the United States.
Well, that was really interesting and very scary stuff, Dr. Malone. And you say there are two things America needs now. One is hope, but the other is restoring our Constitution and Bill of Rights as the foundational documents of our republic. Please explain why hope and our Constitution and Bill of Rights are the way to go to get out of this situation as far as dealing with the stealing of our minds and reprogramming of our minds, which, as you said, is being done without our knowledge.
So hope is key here because people are really disenchanted and disillusioned, and they are living often in their own individual silos. There's been a lot of depression and withdrawal from society and disillusionment with the government. Of course, we had a watershed moment with the election of President Trump. And for those of us that are aligned with the Make America Great Again agenda, that has given us a lot of hope. But for many people, they see a very bleak future, particularly elderly folks, that recognize that the world today is nothing like the world that they grew up in. And often they're very afraid that their children are going to live under increasing tyranny because of what's going down. In terms of, I'm a constitutional conservative, and I'm increasingly also aligned with Murray Rothbard. I believe that the fundamental principles of decentralization that are built into the Constitution structure, the fundamental principle that decisions should be made at the most local competent level. For instance, this is what's behind states' rights, that we need to return to a governmental structure of small government that is focused on respecting the rights of individuals and empowering individuals as small business people, entrepreneurs, etc. Instead, what we have is a government that seems to believe that the only solution to our problems is more government. And that's how we've got to the situation that we're in right now with the debt and everything else. So I think in general, The path forward for people that want to resist these efforts to control everything that you're thinking and feeling and believing, all information that you have access to, because that is the objective of this tech, is number one, to triangulate the truth by seeking multiple sources. You have to take personal responsibility, and this is the basis also for the Constitution, is the idea that people take personal responsibility for their actions. So take personal responsibility to keep your mind clean and avoid the propaganda. And one of the things you can do is seek out multiple sources of information and then decide for yourself what is true. The next thing, if you listen to what I was saying about Matthias Desmet, the underlying precursor that has enabled all of this has been our social fragmentation and isolation. So the cure is easy to figure out. Live with other humans, make friends, make contacts, build community, participate in communities of faith. And frankly, we're big fans of homesteading. So build community, strengthen your interpersonal relationships. Don't stay isolated behind your cell phone dealing with social media. Get out and actually meet and talk to people, including people that you disagree with. The third thing, in my opinion, is that you really do need to educate yourself about the nature of this tech. And that's the purpose of the book, so that you know what they're doing, how they're doing it. And by the way, their strategies and techniques, these people that are trying to impose this on you, are constantly evolving. I just had a broadcast with Tim Pool, and we talked for an hour afterwards, and he has got insights into what's going on in social media right now that I had never heard of. I mean, that everything is changing constantly. They are constantly evolving, and you have to stay aware and on top of their tech. So community, personal responsibility, understand what it is that they're doing, and try to seek your multiple sources of information and figure out what seems to be true for you. Don't rely on anybody, including myself, to tell you what the facts are. Figure it out for yourself.
I hear you, Dr. Malone. I thank you for coming on. Please tell people how they can get your books and how they can reach you and anything else you'd like to promote.
Thank you very much. So Substack is really what supports us these days. And the Substack address is malone.news. So you can subscribe for free, or you can pay and then participate in the chat rooms. And it's a modest monthly fee of $6, as I recall. The books are available anywhere good books are sold. You can buy them direct from Skyhorse, the publisher. Of course, you can buy them from Amazon. The PsyWar book as a audiobook is only available from Amazon, and I recorded that right here in this studio, so you can get that. And then on social media, now Parler, Truth Social, Getter, and of course X, it's at RW Malone MD. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you for coming on, and God bless you and your wife. There you have it. Dr. Robert Malone. I want to thank Dr. Robert Malone for coming on and giving us a heads up about what is going on with the psychological warfare that most people have no idea about. We're not aware our minds are being reprogrammed, and not for the better. It's a detriment not only to us, but very dangerous to the country. So I encourage you to get his book and find out what's going on here, so you will not be a part of the problem. You can be a part of the solution. This podcast is available at radioinfluence.com or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. The video version you can find at YouTube, Rumble, the God Family and Country Television Network, the Rose Unplugged Media Network, vachristian.org, Conservative Television of America, and the AmericaFirstWarehouse.com. Wherever you go, please subscribe, leave a rating and a review, and be sure to tell your friends about the show. Well, that's it for now, everyone. Hope you enjoyed what you heard. So until the next time, this is your host, Gary Binford, saying God bless you, God bless your families, and God bless America.